You know a face. You see it on magazines at the checkout line, on giant billboards overlooking the freeway, on your laptop screen in the middle of the night. You see it so often, you feel like you know the person. The smile, the lines around the eyes, the way they hold a coffee cup. You feel a connection, a familiarity. But what if that face, the most famous face in the world, is just a mask? What if behind that meticulously crafted public image lies a secret so dark, so bizarre, it could shatter our very perception of reality? This isn't a movie script. This isn't some Hollywood pitch. This is a story about what was found. A story pieced together from hushed whispers, deleted files, and a single terrifying discovery made in the quiet solitude of the Hollywood Hills. This is the story of what happened to Brad Pitt after he bought the house on Stillwater Drive.
It all started, as these things often do, with something mundane. An online auction. You know the type. Late at night, you're scrolling through listings for vintage motorcycles, Art Deco furniture, the usual rabbit holes for a guy with too much money and a genuine love for things with history. Brad was no different. He'd just wrapped a grueling shoot and was in that weird, decompressed state of limbo. The world expects you to be at parties, to be seen, but all you really want is the quiet hum of your own refrigerator. His new place in the hills was his sanctuary. It wasn't one of those glass box monstrosities. It was older, tucked away on a winding road called Stillwater Drive, surrounded by ancient oak trees that kept the paparazzi drones at bay. It was a place to be normal, or as normal as Brad Pitt could be. One night, deep into a bidding war fueled by boredom and a glass of bourbon, he won a lot of old film equipment, a box of miscellaneous junk really, lenses, splicers, and a few unlabeled canisters from a defunct studio auction in Pasadena. He barely remembered clicking confirm purchase. A week later, a heavy wooden crate arrived. He pried it open in his workshop, the smell of dust and celluloid filling the air. Most of it was exactly what he expected, junk. But one canister was different. It wasn't the standard aluminum type. It was made of a heavy, dark metal, almost like pewter, and it was cold to the touch, unnaturally so. There was no studio label, no date, no title, just a small, strange symbol etched into the lid, a perfect circle with a single vertical line cutting through the exact center. It felt deliberate. He rolled the heavy canister in his hands, the film inside shifting with a dead weight. It was just an old piece of film, nothing more, but something about it felt wrong, an itch in the back of his mind. That night, he decided to thread it up on the old Moviola projector he kept for reviewing dailies, just to see what was on it. It was the single biggest mistake of his life.
The projector whirred to life, its familiar, comforting clatter echoing in the quiet workshop. For a movie guy, it's a sound that feels like home. The beam of light cut through the darkness, a dancing square of pure white on the far wall. Brad fed the brittle film leader into the gate, the sprockets catching with a satisfying click. He dimmed the lights, settled into his leather chair, and hit the switch. The machine began to hum. The first images flickered onto the screen. It was black and white, grainy, scratched, and clearly old. It looked like a home movie from the 1950s, maybe early 60s. The scene was idyllic, almost painfully so. A young family at a picnic in a sunny park. A mother in a checkered dress spreading a blanket, two small children, a boy and a girl chasing a ball. The camera work was amateurish, shaky, capturing fragments of a perfect summer afternoon. There was no sound on the film, just the low, steady hum of the projector motor filling the room. Brad watched, a small smile on his face. He appreciated this stuff. A lost moment in time, a family he'd never know, their happiness captured forever on a forgotten strip of celluloid. But as he watched, a strange feeling began to creep in. Something was off. The mother's smile was a little too wide, a little too fixed. The children's laughter, though silent, seemed rehearsed. Their movements were fluid, yet strangely precise, like actors hitting their marks rather than kids just playing. It was like watching a perfect imitation of life, a performance of happiness. Then, the camera panned over to the man at the barbecue grill. He was wearing a short-sleeved button-up shirt and dark slacks, the picture of a mid-century American dad. He flipped a burger, turned, and smiled directly into the camera, and Brad's breath caught in his throat. The workshop suddenly felt ice cold. He leaned forward, his eyes wide, knuckles white on the armrests of his chair. It was impossible. It couldn't be. The man in the 60-year-old home movie. It was him, unquestionably. The same jawline, the same eyes, the exact same smile he saw in the mirror every single morning. It wasn't a look-alike. It wasn't a trick of the light. It was his own face, decades younger, staring back at him from a time before he was even born. He slammed his hand on the stop button, the projector grinding to a halt. The single, smiling frame was now frozen on the wall, a silent, impossible ghost.
For a long minute, Brad just stared at the frozen image on the wall. His mind, trained to dissect scripts and find plot holes, was frantically searching for a logical explanation. A prank. It had to be a prank. Probably Clooney. It had his style written all over it. An incredibly elaborate, expensive, and frankly, brilliant prank. He'd have to hand it to him. They must have hired some kid from a VFX house, used some new deep fake technology, and then somehow printed it onto real vintage film stock. It was the only answer that made any sense. He stood up, his legs feeling a little unsteady, and walked to the projector. He rewound the film a few feet, the plastic reel chattering in the silence. He was going to find the tell, the digital seam, a slight blur around the jawline, a flicker in the eyes that gave away the algorithm. He pulled out a small jeweler's loupe from a drawer, an essential tool for inspecting film negatives. He placed the film strip under the light of his workbench lamp, bringing the loupe to his eye. His heart began to pound, a slow, heavy drum against his ribs. There were no pixels, no digital artifacts. He could see the actual grain of the film, the microscopic silver halide crystals that formed the image. He knew what he was looking at. This was authentic Kodak Tri-X film stock.
the kind they stopped making in the early 70s. He could even make out the faint edge code numbers printed along the sprocket holes by the factory. Everything, the chemical fade, the tiny scratches from being run through a projector decades ago, screamed authenticity. The image wasn't printed onto the film. It was chemically burned into the emulsion. This film was real. The man on it was real. And that was impossible. The feeling in the room shifted. The amusement of a suspected prank evaporated, replaced with a cold, creeping dread. It was one thing to see your face on a stranger. It was another to hold physical, undeniable proof that your face existed on a man a full generation before you. The quiet of the house on Stillwater Drive no longer felt like a peaceful sanctuary. It felt like a vacuum, heavy and suffocating. He took a deep breath, the air tasting metallic. He needed to see the rest of it. He had to. With a trembling hand, he threaded the film back into the gate, walked back to his chair, and hit play. The whir of the projector no longer sounded like a comfort. It sounded like a warning.
The smiling man, his own impossible reflection, stayed on screen for only a few more seconds before the camera shakily panned away. The rest of the film was more of the same dreamlike, silent footage. The family packing up their picnic, the children waving goodbye to the camera. It all seemed so innocent, yet every frame was now tainted with an underlying sense of menace. Brad felt like he was watching a ghost story where he was the ghost. He watched until the very end, until the film strip flapped loose from the reel, the bright, empty white light of the projector flooding the room and temporarily blinding him. He sat there in the stark white glare, the projectors whirring the only sound. His mind was a mess of contradictions. He was a logical person, a pragmatist. He believed in what he could see and touch. And he had just seen and touched something that defied all logic. He rewound the film, removed it carefully, and placed the heavy, cold canister on his workbench. He needed to know more. This couldn't be a one-off. That strange symbol etched on the lid, the circle with the vertical line, it had to be a maker's mark, a clue. His first instinct was to call someone. His agent? His lawyer? What would he even say? I think I found a home movie of my doppelganger from the 1960s. They'd think he was losing it, that the stress of the last film had finally cracked him. No, he had to handle this himself, at least for now. He pulled out his laptop, the bright screen a stark contrast to the vintage equipment around him. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. Where do you even start searching for something like this? He began with the symbol. He tried every description he could think of. Circle with vertical line symbol, old film canister logo, pewter film can symbol. Page after page of results came up, alchemical symbols, corporate logos, obscure religious icons, but nothing matched the stark, simple design etched into the metal. It was a dead end. He then tried searching for the defunct film studio, Pasadena Pictures, but the name was too generic. Dozens of small production houses had used similar names over the years. It felt like searching for a single grain of sand on a vast beach. Defeated, he leaned back, running his hair through his hair. As he stared at the ceiling, an idea sparked. It was a long shot, a real Hail Mary.
but it was the only thing he could think of. The auction. The crate was a miscellaneous lot. Maybe there was another clue inside. He grabbed a flashlight and headed back to the workshop, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and a strange, exhilarating sense of purpose. He was no longer just an actor. He was an investigator, and the mystery he was unraveling was his own.
The wooden crate was exactly where he'd left it, a chaotic jumble of cinematic history. Brad methodically began to lift out the other items, placing them carefully on the floor. A defunct light meter with a cracked glass face, a heavy metal film splicer, its blade still sharp, a box of yellowing editing gloves. It was a film nerd's dream, but he wasn't looking for memorabilia. He was looking for another clue, another piece of the impossible puzzle. He ran his hands along the rough wooden interior of the crate, feeling for any hidden compartments, any loose papers tucked into the corners. Nothing. He was about to give up, to write the whole thing off as a dead end, when his fingers brushed against a section of the crate's bottom that felt different. It was a false bottom, a thin, poorly fitted piece of plywood. With a bit of effort, he pried it loose, and underneath, wrapped in a piece of dusty, oil-stained canvas, was a small, leather-bound book. It was a ledger, the kind you'd see in an old black-and-white movie, its cover worn smooth with age. And there, embossed faintly in the center of the cracked leather, was the symbol, the circle with the single vertical line. His hands trembled slightly as he carried it back to the light of his workbench. He opened it. The pages were filled with neat, methodical handwriting in faded blue ink. It was a logbook of some kind. Each entry started with a date, spanning from 1958 to 1972. Next to the dates were strings of alphanumeric codes, followed by short, cryptic notes. Phrases like calibration complete, specimen viable, asset relocated. It read less like a film production log and more like a scientist's journal, a very, very cold scientist. He started flipping through the pages, his eyes scanning the columns of chillingly detached notes. He was looking for anything, any reference to the picnic, to the family, to the face in the film. He landed on an entry dated June 14, 1961. The code next to it was B77A12, and the note made the blood drain from his face. It read, Subject 12, Picnic Test Successful, Visual Data Logged, Acquisition Confirmed, Proceeding to Integration. And then, written just below that entry, as if a final identifier was needed, was a single, terrifying word. A word that had no business being in a 60-year-old logbook.
Pitt. The word just hung there in the silent workshop, a black hole on the yellowed page, pulling in all light and logic. His own name, his family name, staring back at him from the past. For a moment, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. Every rational explanation, prank, coincidence, mistaken identity, crumbled into dust. This was real, and it was directly connected to him in a way he couldn't begin to comprehend. Who was Subject 12? What was integration? Was the man in the film an ancestor he never knew about? No, that didn't feel right. The cold, clinical language in the ledger suggested something far more sinister than a long-lost relative. He spent the next hour poring over the ledger, his initial shock giving way to a grim, focused intensity. He scanned for other names, for locations, for anything that might provide context. The pages were filled with the same chillingly detached jargon. Phase 1 complete. Memory wipe effective. Asset shows no signs of rejection. It was the language of manufacturing, not of human lives. He felt a profound sense of violation, as if he were reading a blueprint for a soul, and one of the parts had his name on it. Realizing the ledger's physical pages could only tell him so much, he turned back to the digital world. His search terms were no longer vague. He had specifics. He opened his laptop and, using a more secure browser, began to type in the cryptic phrases: Project Integration, Subject Acquisition 1961. Nothing. The terms were too broad. He then typed in the alphanumeric code from the entry, B77-A12. The first few pages of results were garbage. Engineering specs, old patent numbers. But then, buried deep on the 7th page, was a link that looked different. It led to a university's digital archive, a scanned copy of a declassified CIA document from a 1982 Senate hearing. The document was almost entirely redacted, a sea of thick black lines. It was a testament to how well a secret could be kept. He scrolled through page after page of this official, sanctioned silence. It was another dead end. But just as he was about to close the file, he saw it. A single unredacted paragraph, likely a simple oversight by the censor. The paragraph spoke of a defunct program from the early 60s focused on radical behavioral conditioning and identity transference. It didn't use the word integration, but the meaning was clear. And at the end of the paragraph, it named the program's director. For the first time, this faceless horror had a name: Dr. Alistair Finch.
Dr. Alistair Finch. The name echoed in Brad's mind, a solid piece of wreckage to cling to in a sea of impossibilities. He now had a target, a ghost to chase. He spent what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, diving back into the digital deepest archives. At first, the search was frustrating. The name was fairly common. There was a Dr. Finch who was a retired dentist in Ohio, and Alistair Finch who wrote gardening books in England. None of them fit. But when he combined the name with the new terms he had, behavioral conditioning, CIA, psychology 1960s, the fog began to clear. A digital ghost began to take shape. Dr. Alistair Finch had been a brilliant, rising star in the world of behavioral psychology in the 1950s, published papers in prestigious journals, a fellowship at Harvard. And then, in 1958, the exact year the entries in the ledger began, he vanished. His academic career just stopped. No more papers, no more conference appearances. It was as if he had ceased to exist. There were no recent photos, no public records after 1958. It was a digital dead end. Brad felt the frustration rising again. He was about to give up for the night when he tried one last desperate search, digging into the online photo archives of old newspapers. He typed Psychology Conference 1957, and a single low-resolution image popped up from a Boston newspaper. It was a group photo of the conference speakers, a row of stern-looking men in dark suits. The caption listed the attendees. And there, fourth from the left, was the name, Dr. A. Finch. Brad zoomed in, the image pixelating as he got closer.
He could just make out a thin man with dark, slick-back hair and thick glasses. This was the architect of the program. But it wasn't Finch's face that made him feel like the floor had dropped out from under him. It was the face of the man standing right next to him, smiling confidently, one hand resting on Dr. Finch's shoulder as if they were old friends. It was the man from the picnic film, the man from 1961. Except this photo was from 1957, and he looked exactly the same, unaged, confident. Here he wasn't a subject, he looked like an associate, a colleague. He was part of it. This whole time, Brad thought he was looking at a victim, but the man in this photo, the man wearing his face, was one of the monsters. And the question that burned in Brad's mind, colder and sharper than before, was no longer who he was, but what he was.
The two faces stared back at him from the grainy 1957 photograph. The cold, calculating doctor and the impossible man who wore Brad's own features like a perfectly tailored suit. This changed everything. His working theory of a government program creating doppelgangers was blown to pieces. The man in the film wasn't a product of the experiment, he was part of it. And if the dates were right, he didn't age. The word integration from the ledger suddenly took on a horrifying new meaning. It wasn't about integrating a new personality into a subject. It was about integrating a subject into a world curated by this entity. He had to see the film again, now with these new eyes. He walked back over to the moviola, his movements sharp and precise. The fear was still there, a cold knot in his stomach, but it was now overlaid with a burning, obsessive need for the truth. He threaded the film, the clatter of the machine loud in the oppressive silence. The picnic scene flickered back to life on the wall. This time, he ignored the man at the grill. He focused on the others, the smiling mother, the two laughing children, and he saw it. It was so obvious now he couldn't believe he'd missed it. They were like animatronics, perfect but lifeless. Their smiles didn't quite reach their eyes. They moved with a chilling grace that wasn't human. They were responding to cues from the man with his face, their heads turning in unison when he spoke, their laughter perfectly timed. They were puppets, and he was the one pulling the strings. The idyllic family picnic wasn't a record of a real event. It was a staged simulation, a test. Then, for a fraction of a second, the camera zoomed in shakily on the little boy's face. The boy who had been smiling his vacant, happy smile suddenly looked directly into the lens, and for one terrifying, heartbreaking moment, the mask dropped. The smile vanished, replaced by an expression of pure, primal fear. It was a silent scream, a desperate plea from a soul trapped behind a porcelain facade. Then, as if a switch was flipped, the programmed smile snapped back into place. The ledger entry flashed in Brad's mind. Subject 12, picnic test successful. His blood ran cold. The man with his face was never Subject 12. The little boy was. The entire scene was a test to see if the boy's conditioning would hold. He had just witnessed the moment a child's true self was extinguished, and the creature wearing his face was observing it all with a serene, paternal smile.
The image of the boy's terrified face was burned into Brad's mind. He felt a wave of nausea, a deep primal disgust that went beyond fear. This wasn't some abstract conspiracy anymore. This wasn't about his own identity or a weird, unexplained mystery. This was about a child, a real child, whose terror he had just witnessed 60 years later. The creature wearing his face wasn't just an anomaly, it was a predator, and the idyllic picnic was its hunting ground. His objective shifted in that instant. This was no longer about self-preservation or curiosity. It was about justice, about finding out what happened to that little boy, to Subject 12. He felt a strange, chilling sense of responsibility, as if by finding this film, he had become the sole witness to a forgotten crime. He turned back to the ledger, his hands moving with renewed purpose. It wasn't just a logbook anymore. It was a tombstone. He found the June 14th, 1961 entry again, and began to read the entries that followed, his dread growing with every line. The neat, cursive handwriting now looked like the scratching of a monster. June 28, 1961. Subject 12 continues to resist memory integration, re-exposing to auditory stimuli. Asset Pitt expresses concerns over methodology. Dr. Finch overrules. July 9th, 1961. Subject exhibiting signs of severe psychological fracture, night terrors, a failure. Asset Pitt argues for termination of this subject's involvement. July 15th, 1961. Finch protocol proceeds. Subject unresponsive to conditioning, a complete loss. The final entry for Subject 12 was dated August 2nd, 1961. It was short and brutal in its simplicity. Subject 12 decommissioned. Biological materials disposed of as per Directive 7. Specimen chamber sterilized. Awaiting next acquisition. Decommissioned. Disposed of. They hadn't just broken the boy. They had erased him. Brad slammed the ledger shut, a raw, angry sound in the dead quiet of the workshop. They had killed him and written it down like they were taking lab notes. This wasn't an experiment, it was a factory. And as he stared at the closed book, a final, horrifying thought struck him. He opened it again to the last page he'd read. Just below the entry that sealed the boy's fate was a new one, dated August 5th, 1961. Subject 13 selected. Designation C45A13. Acquisition scheduled for 8/12. Asset Pitt will personally oversee the initial stages. It wasn't over. It was just the beginning.
Subject 13. The thought of another child being put through that hell was unbearable. The ledger gave no name, only a code and a date. August 12th, 1961. Brad turned back to his laptop, his search now laser-focused. He scoured the digital archives of newspapers from the Pasadena area for that exact date. His search query was grim. Child missing August 12, 1961. After a few moments, a result appeared. A short, digitized article from the Pasadena Star News. The headline sent a chill down his spine.
Local boy vanishes from Brookside Park pool. The article described how a 7-year-old boy, David Miller, had disappeared during a crowded swim meet. He was there one moment, gone the next. Police were baffled. There were no witnesses, no suspects, no ransom note. He had simply vanished. The article included a grainy black and white school photo of a smiling, freckle-faced boy. Brad stared at the innocent face of Subject 13. The ledger wasn't just a record of an experiment. It was a list of the dead, and he was holding it in his hands.
Brad spent the rest of the night cross-referencing dates from the ledger with missing children reports from the 60s and 70s. The pattern was horrifying and undeniable. Every time a new specimen was acquired in the ledger, a child disappeared from the Los Angeles area. Subject 14, a girl taken from a department store. Subject 15, a boy who never came home from his paper route. All of them forgotten cold cases, written off by the police. All of them logged in neat, cursive handwriting. The project, which he now thought of as the Stillwater Project, seemed to end in 1972, the same year the ledger's entries stopped. But one final entry caught his eye. It was different from the others. October 29, 1972. Finch is gone. The facility is compromised. Asset Pitt has initiated the Chrysalis protocol. All subjects terminated. The work must be preserved. A new vessel will be required in time. Chrysalis protocol. A new vessel. The words were terrifyingly vague. It sounded like the entity, Asset Pitt, had shut down the operation and gone into hiding. It sounded like a hibernation, and it implied that one day it would wake up.
Brad's blood ran cold. A new vessel will be required. Was that what he was? He realized the auction was based in Pasadena, the project's likely home base. His winning bid on that specific crate suddenly felt less like a coincidence and more like a carefully laid trap.
A frantic search of the remaining junk in the crate revealed one last secret. A small 8mm film reel hidden inside the lining of an old leather camera bag. The same chilling symbol was scratched into its side.
He played the film. It was short. It showed the entity, Asset Pitt, in 1972, standing in what looked like Brad's own workshop. He looked directly into the camera, holding up handwritten cards. The final card read, "When the vessel is ready, the path will open. You found this because I wanted you to."
The house on Stillwater Drive no longer felt like a home. It was a stage. Brad heard whispers in empty rooms, saw shadows move in the corner of his eye. He was being watched. The path was opening, and he felt an unseen presence drawing closer. Driven by paranoia, he searched his own house. Behind a false wall in the old wine cellar, he found a hidden room.
dust-covered and cold, it contained a single metal chair with leather restraints. It was a specimen chamber from the ledger. He was living inside the monster's old laboratory. "I've been waiting for you." An old man stepped from the shadows of the hidden room. It was Dr. Alistair Finch, frail and ancient. He explained the entity requires a new vessel, a new host, every few decades. A host that is genetically identical. A host like Brad. Finch confessed he was the entity's prisoner, forced to perform the experiments. The creature's goal was to perfect its consciousness transfer. The man from the films wasn't the original entity, just the previous host. The auction, the ledger, it was all Finch's desperate plan to lead Brad to the truth before the transfer was complete.
Finch pointed to a pulsating, organic-looking device in a corner. The chrysalis. The entity was waking up, drawn to Brad. Finch gave him a choice. Destroy the chrysalis and break the cycle, an act which would also kill him due to their linked life force, or allow the transfer and become the next immortal predator.
Brad didn't hesitate. He grabbed a heavy tool and smashed the chrysalis. A psychic scream echoed in his mind as the device shattered. He felt a life force being violently ripped from his own body, and the world went cold. He collapsed as the hidden room began to crumble around him. The screen cuts to black. A final image appears, a news headline months later. Brad Pitt still missing, presumed dead after mansion fire. Cause unknown.